You wake up, take your B12 like always, and have no idea it might be quietly working against you. Not because it's dangerous, but because of what it's mixing with inside your body right now. And if you're over 60, this combination has already started shifting something you can't feel yet. The question is, how long has it been happening? If you're serious about taking better care of your health, make sure you subscribe. I share simple, practical advice designed especially for seniors. And feel free to leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I always read them and appreciate every one of you. Let's get back to it. There's a particular kind of frustration that nobody talks about. Not the frustration of being sick, not the frustration of a bad diagnosis, but the frustration of doing everything right and still feeling like your body didn't get the memo. You take your supplements every morning without fail. You show up to your appointments. You've adjusted your diet, your habits, your lifestyle. You've done what responsible people do after 60. And yet, something feels slightly dimmer than it used to. Your energy doesn't carry you through the day the way it once did. Your thoughts feel like they're arriving through fog. And your body, while not broken, feels like it's operating just one gear below where it should be. Not enough to send you to the emergency room, but enough to notice, enough to quietly wonder. Now, before you blame age, before you assume this is just what getting older feels like, I want you to consider something. What if the problem isn't what you're lacking? What if everything you need is already inside your system, but your body has quietly lost the ability to use it correctly? That's not a theory. That's a pattern I've watched unfold in my practice for over 2 decades, in patients who were disciplined, informed, and genuinely committed to their health. And at the center of almost every single case was something nobody had thought to question. Not a new medication, not a dangerous habit, something trusted, something routine, something millions of people over 60 reach for every single morning without a second thought: vitamin B12. My name is Dr. James Cross. I've spent more than 20 years working closely with adults navigating the health shifts that come with aging. And I can tell you something with complete confidence. The most consequential problems I see in my patients are never the loud ones. They're the quiet ones. The ones building in the background while everything on paper looks perfectly fine. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how combining B12 with 2 of the most commonly prescribed medications for adults over 60 creates a hidden conflict inside your body, one that standard checkups are not designed to catch. And more importantly, I'm going to show you how to fix it. But first, I want to know who's watching this. If you're over 60, drop your age in the comments right now, because the longer certain patterns have been quietly running inside your body, the more urgent everything I'm about to share becomes. Let me ask you something. When was the last time someone sat down with you, really sat down, and explained how your body actually processes what you give it? Not just what to take, but what happens after. Because here's the truth most supplement labels will never tell you. Taking the right thing and your body using the right thing are 2 completely different events. And after 60, the gap between those 2 events gets wider. Not because your body is broken, not because your choices are wrong, but because the internal system responsible for activating what you consume becomes more sensitive, more easily disrupted, more dependent on everything working in precise coordination. Think about it this way. Imagine you hire the best chef in the world. He's in your kitchen. The ingredients are all there. Everything is fresh, high quality, exactly what was ordered. But the stove isn't working properly. The heat is inconsistent. The timing is off. The coordination between burners is broken. That chef, no matter how talented, cannot produce what he was brought in to produce. The problem was never the chef. The problem was never the ingredients. The problem was the system supporting them. That's exactly what happens inside the bodies of millions of adults over 60. The nutrients are present. The intention is right. The effort is real. But somewhere between swallowing that supplement and the moment your cells are supposed to benefit from it, something in the coordination breaks down. And here's what makes this so easy to miss. Your body doesn't send an alarm. There's no pain, no sudden change, no moment where you can point and say, there, that's when it started. It's gradual. It's subtle. It hides behind explanations that sound reasonable. I'm just tired. I've been busy. My focus isn't great. I probably need more sleep. I'm 67. This is just how it goes. But what if it isn't? What if the fatigue isn't aging? It's a system quietly running out of sync. What if the mental fog isn't inevitable? It's a signal your body has been sending, waiting for someone to finally interpret it correctly. This is the shift I want you to make today. Stop asking only, "What am I missing?" Start asking, "What inside me has stopped working together?" Because that single change in perspective, from deficiency thinking to coordination thinking, is what separates the patients in my practice who plateau from the ones who genuinely turn things around. And everything that follows in this conversation builds on that foundation. Because once you understand that your body operates as a system, not a collection of isolated parts, what I'm about to show you next will make complete and immediate sense. And it will change the way you look at your morning routine forever. Here's where it gets interesting, and honestly, a little unsettling. Because what I'm about to share with you is the part that frustrates my patients more than anything else. More than the fatigue, more than the brain fog, more than the slow, creeping sense that something is quietly off. What frustrates them most is when they finally go to their doctor, sit down with their results, and hear those 4 words that are supposed to be reassuring. Your levels look fine, and they leave the office with a clean report. Normal B12, normal blood work, no red flags. But they drive home feeling exactly the same way they felt before they walked in. Still tired, still foggy, still running at that 1 gear below where they know they should be. And now, on top of everything else, they feel something even harder to carry: confusion. Because if everything is fine, why don't they feel fine? If the numbers are good, why does the body keep telling a different story? I want to answer that question directly. And I want to start by telling you something that took me years of clinical observation to fully appreciate. A normal B12 reading on a standard blood test does not tell you whether B12 is actually working inside your body. Read that again, because this is where the entire conversation changes. See, standard lab panels measure how much B12 is present in your blood. They measure quantity. They measure what's circulating. What they don't measure, what most routine checkups are simply not designed to assess, is whether that B12 is being properly activated and utilized at the cellular level. And those are 2 entirely different things. You can have a bloodstream full of B12 and still have cells that are functionally starving for it. It's the difference between having a fully stocked warehouse and having a broken delivery system. The goods exist, but they're never reaching their destination. So when your doctor looks at your panel and says your B12 is normal, they're not lying to you. They're not being negligent. They're simply reading the only data point the standard test was built to capture. But your body? Your body is living in the gap between that data point and the full picture. And in that gap, quietly, consistently, without a single warning label, a much more consequential process begins to unfold. Now here's what makes this paradox even harder to detect. The symptoms it produces don't arrive dramatically. There's no sudden crash. No undeniable moment of crisis. Instead, you get the slow version. Energy that used to refill overnight, that now takes days to recover. Mental sharpness that used to feel effortless, that now requires conscious effort just to maintain. A body that moves, but with a resistance it didn't carry 10 years ago. And because each of these changes arrives gradually, the mind does what it's trained to do. It adapts, it explains, it normalizes. Until one day, a patient sits across from me and says something I've heard more times than I can count. "I just thought this was what 65 was supposed to feel like." It isn't. And the fact that your blood work looks clean doesn't mean the system is clean. It means the problem is operating in a place the standard test wasn't built to look. Which raises one critical question. If it's not showing up on the panel, where exactly is it hiding? That answer starts with a real person. Someone who did everything right, followed every instruction, trusted every number, and still ended up exactly where you might be right now. His name was Gerald, 71 years old, retired engineer, the kind of man who approached his health the same way he approached everything else in his career, with precision, with discipline, with zero shortcuts. Gerald had a system. Every morning before breakfast, the same routine. Systems laid out in order, B12 included. Never missed. He tracked his medications, attended every follow-up, and kept a small notebook where he logged how he felt each week. A notebook. When he first came to see me, he slid it across my desk before I could even ask a single question. Months of entries, consistent, detailed, color-coded, and as I read through it, one pattern emerged so clearly it was almost impossible to ignore. The entries started strong, good energy, clear thinking, active weekends, but somewhere around the 8-month mark, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the language started to shift. Felt slower today. Concentration wasn't there. Legs felt heavier than usual. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would send most people rushing to a hospital. But Gerald noticed, because Gerald paid attention. He had also been managing type 2 diabetes for several years, responsibly, consistently, exactly as prescribed. His medication was doing what it was supposed to do. His blood sugar was controlled. His doctor was satisfied. On paper, Gerald was a model patient. But Gerald didn't feel like a model patient. He felt like a machine running on slightly degraded fuel, functional, but fading in ways that the gauges weren't measuring. When I looked beyond his standard panel and started asking different questions, a clearer picture began to form. The medication Gerald had been taking long-term to manage his blood sugar, while absolutely necessary and effective for that purpose, was quietly interfering with something his body depended on. Not dramatically, not in a way that triggered any alerts, but consistently enough, and for long enough, that the impact had started to surface. His B12 wasn't being processed the way it should have been. Not because he wasn't taking it, he was taking it faithfully every single morning, but the internal pathway responsible for activating and utilizing that B12 had been gradually compromised, disrupted by the very medication keeping another part of his health in check. When I explained this to Gerald, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up and said something I've never forgotten. So the system I built to protect myself was working against me at the same time. Yes, not through any fault of his own, not through negligence or carelessness, simply because no one had ever shown him how these two things interacted inside his body. And Gerald is not an exception. Gerald is the rule. Because across my years of practice, I've seen this same story repeat itself, in different bodies, different backgrounds, different lives, including one that looked nothing like Gerald's. Same hidden consequence, completely different path to get there. If Gerald's story was about discipline, Margaret's story was about endurance. 64 years old, former school administrator, the kind of woman who spent 30 years putting everyone else's needs before her own, and only started prioritizing her health after retirement finally gave her the time to do it. She wasn't managing diabetes. She had never struggled with blood sugar. Her lifestyle was different. Her background was different. Her medical history was almost nothing like Gerald's. But Margaret had been dealing with something else entirely. For years, quietly, persistently, in the background of an otherwise full life, she had managed chronic acid reflux. Nothing severe enough to derail her days, but uncomfortable enough that her doctor had recommended long-term medication to keep it under control. And it worked. The reflux was managed, the discomfort eased, life continued. Margaret also took her B12 religiously, because she had read enough to know that absorption becomes more difficult with age, and she wasn't about to ignore that. Responsible, informed, consistent, just like Gerald. So when Margaret started noticing changes, subtle ones, the kind that creep in so gradually you almost convince yourself they aren't real, she didn't panic. She adapted. She went to bed earlier. She cut back on commitments that felt draining. She told herself she was simply adjusting to a quieter pace of life. But the fatigue didn't lift with more rest. The mental cloudiness didn't clear with fewer obligations. And there was something else, a vascular tension she described as feeling like her body was working harder than it should just to stay steady. She came to see me after her annual physical returned, predictably, with results that looked completely acceptable. Normal B12 levels, controlled reflux, nothing flagged. And yet Margaret sat across from me looking exhausted in a way that clean paperwork simply couldn't explain. So I started asking the questions that standard panels don't prompt. And what emerged was a pattern I recognized immediately. The medication Margaret had been using long-term to suppress her acid reflux, effective as it was for that specific purpose, had been quietly doing something else on the side. It had been gradually reducing her stomach's ability to release the acid needed to properly absorb B12 in the first place. not as a side effect anyone had highlighted, not as something listed prominently on any label she had been handed, just a slow, consistent interference, operating beneath the surface of every clean result she had ever received. Her B12 was present in her blood, but the pathway that should have been delivering it, activating it, putting it to work inside her cells, had been compromised for years. Two completely different people, two completely different conditions, two completely different medications, same internal breakdown. When I walked Margaret through what had been happening inside her body, she didn't get angry. She got quiet. Then she said something that stopped me mid-sentence. I spent 3 years thinking I was just getting older. I was actually just uninformed. That sentence has stayed with me, because it captures exactly what makes this problem so particularly unfair. It doesn't target people who are careless. It targets people who are trying, people like Gerald, people like Margaret, people who show up, do the work, and trust that the system around them is giving them the full picture. It isn't always. And the thread connecting both of their stories, the hidden factor that neither their medications nor their blood work was revealing, has a name. One most people have never heard, but one that, once you understand it, changes everything about how you read your own health. Right now, someone you love is taking B12 and one of these medications, and they have no idea, not because they're careless, because this information was never made easy to find. You found it. They haven't. Subscribe and share this video before you close the tab, because the people who matter to you deserve the same chance you just gave yourself. So what exactly connects Gerald and Margaret? 2 different ages, 2 different conditions, 2 different medications, 2 different lives, yet the same quiet unraveling happening beneath the surface of both. The answer isn't another vitamin. It isn't another deficiency. It isn't something you can fix by simply adding one more supplement to your morning routine. The answer is a compound your body produces naturally, every single day, that almost nobody outside of specialized clinical settings ever thinks to measure. It's called homocysteine, and I want you to remember that word, because by the time this conversation is over, you're going to understand why it may be the single most important number your doctor has never checked. Here's how it works. Your body is constantly running chemical processes in the background, recycling, converting, maintaining. Most of these happen without any conscious input from you whatsoever. One of those processes involves taking a naturally occurring byproduct, homocysteine, and converting it back into something useful. Under normal conditions, this recycling process runs smoothly and efficiently. Homocysteine gets produced. B12 steps in as part of the conversion process. The byproduct gets neutralized and repurposed. The system stays balanced, clean, efficient, invisible. But here's where everything changes. When B12 isn't being properly activated, when the pathway responsible for utilizing it has been quietly disrupted by long-term medication use, that recycling process begins to slow down. And homocysteine doesn't get converted. It accumulates, not explosively, not in a way that triggers immediate symptoms or sets off any standard alarm, just steadily, quietly, consistently. Think of it like static building up inside an electrical wire system. The wires are all there, the connections exist, everything looks intact from the outside. But underneath, invisible to any basic inspection, the interference is growing. And over time, that static doesn't just cause inconvenience. It disrupts the entire flow of the system it was supposed to be running through. That's homocysteine. When it builds unchecked inside the body, it begins placing a particular kind of stress on your blood vessels, making them gradually less flexible, less responsive, and quietly more vulnerable to long-term cardiovascular strain. Not overnight, not dramatically, but consistently and cumulatively. Here's what makes this especially frustrating. Homocysteine is not part of a standard blood panel. Your doctor isn't checking it at your annual physical. It isn't flagged on the routine results you review every year. It doesn't appear alongside your cholesterol, your glucose, or your B12 level. So you can walk out of every single checkup with a clean bill of health, and still have homocysteine quietly accumulating in the background, still have that static building inside your system, still have that slow, invisible pressure mounting against your vascular walls, while every report tells you everything is fine. This is why Gerald felt like a machine running on degraded fuel. This is why Margaret's body felt like it was working harder than it should. This is the missing variable that neither of their standard panels was designed to find. And now that you know it exists, the next question becomes far more important than simply identifying it. Because knowing the name of the problem is only half the conversation. The other half, the part that actually matters for your body, your energy, and your long-term health, is understanding exactly how deep this disruption goes, and just how silently it has been operating inside you. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine a busy city intersection. Not just any intersection, a critical one. The kind where 4 major roads converge, where hundreds of cars pass through every single hour, where the entire flow of the surrounding neighborhood depends on everything moving in coordinated, precise sequence. Now imagine the traffic signals start malfunctioning. Not all at once, not in an obvious, dramatic failure that shuts everything down immediately, but gradually. One signal runs a few seconds late, another flickers inconsistently, a third stops communicating properly with the signals around it. The cars are still there, the roads are still there, the infrastructure hasn't collapsed, but nothing is flowing the way it was designed to flow. And the longer that coordination breakdown continues, the more pressure builds at every point where the system was supposed to move freely. That intersection? That's your cardiovascular system after prolonged homocysteine accumulation. And B12, properly activated, properly utilized, is what keeps those signals running in sync. Here's what I need you to understand about B12 that goes far beyond what most people are ever told. It isn't simply an energy vitamin. It isn't just something that keeps you from feeling tired. B12 is a critical coordinator inside your body. It plays a direct role in nerve signaling, the communication network that keeps your brain and body connected and responsive. It supports red blood cell formation, ensuring your blood carries oxygen efficiently to every tissue that depends on it. And crucially, it acts as an essential driver in the process that keeps homocysteine from accumulating in the first place. When B12 is functioning correctly, it partners with other compounds to neutralize homocysteine before it can build to damaging levels. But when medications interfere with how B12 is absorbed, activated, or utilized, that partnership breaks down. The conversion stalls. The homocysteine accumulates, and the signals that were supposed to keep your vascular system flowing smoothly begin to fall out of rhythm. What follows isn't sudden. It's the slow version of damage, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it has already been building quietly for months, sometimes years. Blood vessels that were once supple and responsive begin to stiffen gradually under the consistent chemical pressure. Circulation that was once efficient begins to labor imperceptibly, and the body, remarkable as it is, begins compensating in ways that drain energy, dull cognition, and create that persistent, low-grade heaviness that so many adults over 60 have simply accepted as inevitable. It isn't inevitable. Nothing was broken in Gerald's body. Nothing was broken in Margaret's body. The infrastructure was intact. The roads were all there. But the signals had stopped coordinating properly. And when signals fail, even gradually, even silently, the entire system eventually feels it. The fatigue, the fog, the vascular tension. These weren't random symptoms. They were a city intersection quietly descending into gridlock, while every report insisted the roads were clear. Now here's the part that changes everything. Because understanding how the breakdown happens is important, but what you actually need, what Gerald needed, what Margaret needed, what anyone navigating this quietly deserves, is a clear, practical path back to coordination. And that path is simpler than you might think. Here's what I want you to hold on to. Everything I've walked you through today, the hidden interference, the accumulating homocysteine, the signals falling out of rhythm, none of it is a life sentence. It isn't permanent, it isn't irreversible, and it absolutely does not mean you stop taking B12. What it means is this: the strategy needs to become smarter than the problem. And in my experience, the patients who turn this around most effectively aren't the ones who add more to their routine. They're the ones who start paying attention to how everything works together. So let me walk you through exactly what that looks like in practice. The first shift is moving beyond quantity and focusing on function. Most people, and most standard tests, are only asking one question about B12. Is it there? The better question, the question that actually changes outcomes, is it working? Because presence without function is just a number on a page. What you want to understand is whether your B12 is being activated at the cellular level, whether the pathway responsible for putting it to work has been compromised by long-term medication use, and whether the form of B12 you're currently taking is even capable of bypassing that disruption. The second shift is supporting the full pathway, not just one nutrient. B12 doesn't operate alone. It works in coordination with other compounds, folate, B6 among them, to complete the homocysteine conversion process effectively. When the entire pathway is supported, the system doesn't just function, it restores. And when it restores, the downstream effects follow naturally. Energy that feels sustainable rather than borrowed. Clarity that doesn't require effort to maintain. A body that moves with less resistance and more rhythm. The third shift is the simplest, and perhaps the most powerful. Bring awareness to the conversation your medications are having with your nutrients. Not fear, not paranoia, just awareness. Because these interactions don't require you to choose between managing one condition and protecting another. They require you to understand that both conversations are happening simultaneously inside your body, and that a small, targeted adjustment in timing, form, or nutritional support can change the outcome of both. This is exactly what I guided Gerald toward. Within 3 months of making precise, targeted adjustments, nothing extreme, nothing disruptive to his existing treatment, he came back for a follow-up and slid that notebook across my desk again. The entries had changed. Energy held through the afternoon. Thinking felt clearer today. Felt like myself again. 3 words that carry more clinical weight than any panel result I could show you. Felt like myself. Margaret's outcome told the same story. Not a dramatic transformation. A quiet restoration. The kind that happens when a system finally stops fighting itself and starts working as it was designed to. That's what alignment feels like. Not fireworks, just rhythm returning to a place that had forgotten what rhythm felt like. And that is entirely available to you. I'm Dr. James Cross. Take care of how your body works, not just how it feels. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching all the way through. Staying informed is key to living a healthier, longer life. If you want more simple, practical health advice, make sure you subscribe and tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a comment and rate this from 1 to 10. Your feedback helps me create better guidance for you.